All right, guys, today we're going to be doing some work on a failing door hinge piece. You can hear that sound. Let me... Right there. That popping noise. And what we're dealing with there is, if we zoom in here, you guys can see, you've got this pin that's staked in by the factory, and then on the bottom of it, there's this roller that sits on a pin that's pressed in to an opening at the bottom of that. And what you can see here is this guy has bent and is coming off. Now, at some point, if you let this go, this guy could break off, and it'll be a lot more trouble to get it out, or even worse, it could cause this housing piece to crack, and we can't do the kind of repair that we're planning to do today. GM made this pin that goes in the hinge pin. So you got the big pin's the hinge pin. And then inside here is a pin that the roller sits on. And GM made replacements for this roller and that pin to go inside this big hinge pin. Aftermarket parts will usually come up here and ask you to drill this out. You can see if you zoom in here where this was staked by the factory. Kind of get that. You can see the kind of indentations where it was staked in. But you don't have to replace that in the factory approach. We're just going to replace that roller and that pin. I'll show you what those parts are, but the first thing we're going to need to do to get at this is this door spring right here. We're going to need to get a spring compressor and take this out so we can get a better view of this, and I'll show you how you can get this out without a lot of disassembly. All right, guys, we're going to get this spring off. First thing we're going to do is we're going to turn the dome lights off just so that we're going to have this door open for a while. We don't want to run down the power. This is what I'm going to be using to get the door spring off, just a standard door spring compressor. Put a link in the description if it's something that you are looking for. Let's see, best place for this guy, maybe on top for you guys, so you can see. You're just going to wedge him into the spring. And then we're going to get our tool in here and we're going to tighten him up. Make sure you've got some safety goggles on there. As soon as I get this guy where I don't have to use my finger, because it is a spring compressor, so it can be a dangerous thing. A little bit more. Almost got him. All right, guys, I guess just a little bit more did the trick here. He's got to get this guy all the way and we can get him out, right? So we're going to set him aside. And next thing what we're going to do is, the plan is, so now that I can move this piece out of the way, you can see this, right? There's your spinning roller, and then he's sitting on that pin there. So the plan for getting this out is we're going to knock this guy out from the bent side, pop him out so that we can then cleanly remove the pin without causing any damage to this, and then we're going to inspect that to make sure it's not cracked. So I'm going to get set up for that. All right, guys, so before we get this off, let me show you what we're dealing with here. So the first part we're going to be replacing is a GM 2026 2500, and that's the pin. All right, so you can see the serrations here and then the smooth part of the pin. And you can see how far this goes in and comes down. If you take a look, you can just barely see right here the serrations, which says it's currently embedded right about to there. Right about to there. So we've got about, a 1/2 inch total length, but probably a little less than that of actual length it's holding. And then what slides on this would be a 155/69 426, and this is the actual roller. Right, so the way these two go together. Right, so there's the roller. And then the pin goes on the roller, like that. And that's normally what rolls around on that hinge bracket where the spring's attached. And so this is what we're trying to get out of there. All right, guys, another thing just to show real quick on this, you'll see these grooves that are cut into this bushing inside here, right? And the cuts start here, but they don't go all the way through. That's to allow lubrication to slip down through here and lubricate this rotationally. So just another indication of the correct orientation. So set this guy's aside. So the plan of attack on this, and each one's going to be a little bit different, but looking at this one, the plan of attack is we're going to come in with a couple of chisels first, just to kind of get us in here as a wedge and try to see if we get this down a little bit. I've also got a variety of pry bars and some punches. We'll eventually be able to figure out what works best for our setup. Definitely use eye protection on this since we're going to be hammering around on things. Alright, so we didn't get much out of that because it's already come out too far. So now we're going to move up to trying a punch. So the problem that's happening with this one is that it's too damaged. So the roller is going to have a tendency to come all the way off the pin. But I think we're going to go ahead and let it do that and then just work on the pin itself. Okay, so the metal roller came off that bushing piece. Now the dealer would have had a special tool for doing all of this that we obviously don't have. So it makes it a lot harder, but it's still doable. All right, guys, we ended up just deciding to take this small crowbar here and go ahead and prise down from the top and get what's left of this insert from the roller out of it. It's like a bushing. Right there, we put a little PB blaster on it as well to let that start getting up in there. So you guys can see there's our pin, and we still have to get this guy extracted. So what I'm going to probably switch to now is still using the end of this crowbar here, prizing bar. It just happens to fit very nicely on the end of the pin. And I'm searching for something I can use as a fulcrum here. This is not what I'm going to use, but just to show you guys what I'm talking about here. Something I can get up in here so that I can get some prizing power against the hinge. And see if we can't begin to get that pin to work its way out. Once we can get him out, putting the new one in is just a matter of tapping him home. So I've done this a couple of times. It's always a big hassle, but it does eventually go. So I'll keep you guys posted as we proceed here. All right, guys, if we zoom in here, you can see our progress. We're just about done. So at this point, I'm going to shove some paper towels in here just so I don't end up with losing the pin in the fender well or something like that. I think one more of these will have it out for us. And I'll show you guys what I ended up doing here. It's not the preferred way I wanted to do it, but this guy was kind of wedged in there with some corrosion. And so this was what I ended up having to do. So we're just going to position him back on the end of this pin, right? And then we're going to take a socket in there as a fulcrum. Now the dangerous part of this is with this particular tool, it's just being careful of this, right? Definitely not what I prefer to do. Probably a nice tool that you could make for something like this would be to cut the end off of something like this and maybe weld an extension on, but I think this will work fine for what we need. Once you get that first piece of the pin to let go, and the rest of it, see, this is where we had the corrosion that was kind of holding it on. You can see that guy's nice and bent. All right, so before we go on, though, we need to inspect to make sure that the female part of this is not cracked. So we're going to clean this up, and then we're going to get a mirror and check that out. All right, guys, if we put a mirror up in here and we get our light situated, you guys can see. So we don't have any cracks. We got a couple of factory staking marks that were done when this was first assembled, but we've got no cracks, and we don't have anything but very light corrosion at the very top of this cavity. Hopefully you guys can see that. So I'm satisfied that this is, the main thing you're looking for is this broken, in which case you can't put a new pin back in it. This guy's fine to put a new pin in, so that's what we're going to proceed to do. We're going to try to see if we can blow out some of the debris that's in there. Just because I had to turn the canned air upside down there. You got a little bit of the liquid propellant coming out. I'm going to take our pin assembly that we showed earlier. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of super lube on the outer teeth, because this guy is mostly held in by the pressure from the spring. So I'm not super concerned about there being lubrication on this pin. And we're going to do the same thing if we can inside the housing. All right, and then as far as how this guy gets assembled, right, you can see there's two different sides to this. There's this side and there's this side. Now, usually what I've seen is the way I'm showing it right here, where the pin is on the small side and goes into that recess. That's how the one we just took off came off. And then this top part acts as a little bit of a bushing if it ends up getting seated too far. So that's how we're going to put this guy in. If our flashlight will cooperate with us. All right, so I'm going to just try to tap him in with one of the drifts I brought out here. just to get him started. And then just in case we end up having him pop out, we're going to do the same thing we did before with some paper towels, just so we don't lose our parts in the fender well. Waste time having to fish them. And then to get this guy going in, we're going to drive him in. It's an interference fit. And we're going to start trying to drive him in from the bottom. We've got this guy back in there, and I'm just going to be lightly tapping him at this large brass drift. There's really no room to get anything else in there. So something like this, which is soft, which isn't going to hurt the pin. Maybe a piece of iron stock if you don't have it, but you're just going to be tapping him back in. The good news about this, you know, is the more it goes up, the more leverage you get. All right, guys, after you get it well seated and straight, if we zoom in, we can see that position now. We got just maybe a quarter of an inch left to drive in. At this point, we can finally get, you know, a decent tool in here instead of having improvise, which would be this big C-clamp. So I'm just going to put some paper towels up here around the finish. Just want to avoid getting any scratches on that. Come up underneath the pin. As soon as I get this in position, I'll move my hand. You guys can see what's going on. All right, so we got that bottom of that C-clamp well positioned on our pin, and now we're just going to crank it on in. Get this out of you guys' way so you can see. So it's going to like pop and snap as it goes in. But you see it's continuing to go in. I'm actually doing it from the front of the door. So having to periodically go back and check on the progress. All right, so she's continuing to close up, so we're just going to continue doing that and come back here in a moment. All right, guys, we're just about to finally seat it. Just got a little bit more to go. There we go. Looks like we've got it fully seated now. Now we just need to back our clamp off. And then we'll be done with this repair after we reinstall the door hinge spring. So one of the things I did, let me go ahead and get this spring out of this C-clamp out here. Let me show you what I did. All right, just to get that last bit, guys, I found, you know, I have to put a little cheater bar on here to get enough leverage just to get that last little bit to seat that bushing. All right, guys, we've got him in there. We're just putting our mirror in there, make sure that we don't have any cracks or damage to the bushing. See, we got a little bit of paint that came off of the clamp onto the bottom of the pin. That's nothing. And now we want to make sure the roller's freely spinning, which it is. So now before we put the spring back on, we're going to give it a shot of lubriplate to work into those grooves we talked about. This is like a kind of a thick kind of a lubricant. It's going to be a little bit dark there for a sec. All right, flashlight likes to walk. He just likes to walk. All right, now we can put the spring back in. The way the spring's going to go, this clamp here is going to go up against the roller. And then there's a little piece here. Hopefully you guys can see it. One end of the spring goes on here. And the other end of the spring goes on this, there's that thing walking again, this circular piece back here against the door. So if you come down a little bit with the camera, kind of see this indentation right here. You can see this indentation right there. And so we're going to put the spring back in the same way we took it out between the two of those. Now we may have to tighten this guy down a little bit more because the this thing was bent out pretty far. In fact, I'm seeing that's the case. But we can squeeze it on there. All right, so hopefully now you guys can see that, right? So on this back side of the spring, you see how we've got it on that round boss that sticks out? And then on this side of the spring here, we've got it inserted into the bracket piece, right? And when we got it like that, we're ready to start taking the tension off. So we're just going to make sure we hold it in the right position. Actually, I'm going the wrong way there. Just always want to keep checking this guy. Just want to make sure he is seated where he is supposed to be. All right, guys, here's just another view of the spring after we've got it seated in place again, just so you can see what I was referring to in the earlier shot of how each end of the spring is seated between the boss that's part of the door and then the part that it inserts into that's part of the bracket that rolls on the roller that we just replaced. Okay, now we can push our little insulation for this door harness. Got worked out because we bumped it while we were working around in here. Make sure that's there, otherwise you'll get water intrusion into the fender area. It can lead to some rust. If you notice that you've got any kind of scratches from this, make sure you touch them up. Get a little thing of touch-up paint and take care of that. But otherwise, we should be free of our sound now. So we still got a little pop from the spring seating, but we fixed our problem with the roller and the pin being bent. So, if you guys got comments, you have other ways you've done this, other ways you've improvised this, go ahead and leave something below. I'd love to hear about it. If you've got questions about the tools or the parts, I've got links in the description for the GM parts that we used here. You can find those there. If you found this video useful, please take some time to like it, and thanks for watching.